All right, good morning, everyone. I'm Laura Barrera, Managing Editor of No-Till Farmer Magazine, and I'd like to welcome you to this morning's No-Till Farmer webinar. Today we are going to hear from Kelly Gregg, a biologist for Vive Crop Protection. Kelly is going to help you understand the obstacles impacting germination and emergence of no-till crops and new approaches to warding off diseases while feeding the plant in furrow. Today's No-Till Farmer webinar is sponsored by Vive Crop Protection. They are the producers of the fertilizer-compatible Asteroid, Bifender, and Fenstro fungicide and insecticide products. We want to thank Vive Crop Protection for making today's webinar possible. We also want to thank our presenter, Kelly Gregg, for sharing in today's webinar the keys to in-furrow fertility and disease protection. Before we turn things over to Kelly, there are a couple of housekeeping items we want to make you aware of. On your screen, there is an orange box with a white arrow inside of it. You can click on that and it will open up to reveal a question or comment field that will allow you to submit questions at any time during the presentation. At the end of the webinar, we will look to answer as many questions as possible. If for any reason the webinar is disrupted or you seem to be disconnected, just go back to the invitation email you received and rejoin the webinar through the link in the email, just as you did when you logged in today. With that said, thanks again for joining us, and I will turn the controls over to Kelly Gregg. Good morning to you, Kelly.
Hi, thank you, Laura. First, I just want to welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. As Laura mentioned, my name is Kelly Gregg. I'm a biologist and marketing associate with Vive Crop Protection. We're a new company that's bringing you new ways to use products that you already love and trust. The focus of this talk today will be on the unique challenges faced by no-till growers and field crops in terms of the nutrient availability and diseases, and how you can combat these challenges with at-plant products. Okay, so we'll be going over today the impact that residue can have on soil temperature. We'll also be looking at the impact that starter fertilizer has on field crops. We'll look at in-furrow fungicide and how that will affect your field crops in no-till situations. And then we'll do a brief comparison between the different fungicide programs that you can be using. We'll then look at some of the different registered products that are available for use in those programs. So first, we'll get into the impact that crop residues have on soil temperatures and what that means for you as a no-till farmer. So typically in conventional tillage, residues are incorporated into the soil. This also churns up the soil, so darker, richer soil is on top, and this increases the ability of the soil to absorb the sun energy. Both of these things can allow the sun to penetrate into the soil, which warms and dries things more quickly. The warmer, drier soils also increase microbial activity, which in turn creates more bioavailable nutrients. This promotes fast germination and emergence. A lot of the early season diseases thrive in cold, wet environments, so when you're warming up those soils and drying them, they have less of a chance of causing problems. Typically in no-till farming, over 30% of the plant tissue is left behind as residues. These residues provide a layer of insulation over the field, which helps to prevent erosion, but it can also prevent the sun from warming and drying up the soils as quickly as it happens in microbial activity, so the bioavailability of nutrients in the soil is limited until soils warm up. Residues also provide a source of fungal inoculum when they're left over from the season before. Tilling this into the soil can offer good control through microbial breakdown of the plant host tissue, but leaving them on the surface does not allow for that breakdown. In addition to this, many diseases love the cold, wet environments and can use the water to travel easily to seeds and roots. Because of this, no-till growers face unique challenges with typically cooler and wetter soils than in conventional tilling. Looking at this slide, this study was done in Wisconsin, and it highlights the effects that residues can have on soil temperatures. The plowed sites, which are shown here in green, had higher soil temperatures than in the no-till sites, which are shown in orange. The no-till corn plots with soybean, wheat, and corn residues were all lower in temperature than their tilled counterparts. The corn residues providing the largest drop in temperature, as you can see here. Because of this lower temperature and the associated increase in disease pressure and moisture, soil residues can decrease yields if they're not managed differently than conventionally tilled fields. This is why it's important to establish different management practices when you're switching to no-till, and to also be aware of the differences in soils. A very important management decision when you're using no-till farming is to decide whether or not a starter fertilizer is right for your fields. So we'll talk about that next. Starter fertilizer can be an efficient means of supplementing a broadcast fertility program. Crop residues can restrict the distribution of phosphorus close to the surface, which limits the nutrient availability at planting depth. Soils with suboptimum soil test values for phosphorus will often experience significant yield benefit from applying an in-furrow starter fertilizer. Cold and wet growing conditions can inhibit the nutrient availability and uptake, regardless of the soil fertility. Cool temperatures slow plant growth, and wet soils inhibit the respiration of roots, which can reduce the nutrient uptake. These conditions may also be favorable for seedling diseases that impact the roots, which further helps to reduce the nutrient uptake ability of the plant. Cold and wet conditions also inhibit the activity of soil microbes that are needed for nutrient mineralization, which delays the release of nutrients found in the organic matter. When you're looking at seedlings in particular, they have small root systems that need to support rapid seedling growth. In this stage, it is critical to maximize the amount of nutrients that the roots come into contact with. Any stressors that impact the roots, including insects and seedling diseases, can dramatically reduce the nutrient uptake. Looking at this table, it illustrates how the nutrient uptake per length of root changes as the corn grows and matures. If you're looking at the four-leaf stage, you can see that with small root systems, you absorb nutrients at 10 times the rate per mile of root per day compared to roots when corn is at tassel. These numbers stress how important it is for small root systems to get all the nutrients that they can. So having fertilizers in close proximity to roots will maximize their chance of meeting their nutritional demands. Using a starter fertilizer maximizes the nutrient uptake of young plants when they have those small root systems, increasing the early season plant growth even when broadcast phosphorus is applied. Broadcast phosphorus distributes very slowly in the soil, where a starter fertilizer placed in close proximity to the seed really spoon feeds your nutrients to the seedlings. In this study, in-furrow applications of 10-30-40 to corn increased the early season plant growth beyond the effect of broadcast fertilizer on its own. Increased early growth can lead to advanced crop maturity and reduced grain moisture, saving you money on drying costs after harvest. It is important that your plants receive enough nutrients early on, as grain sets are typically determined earlier than we think. For example, with corn, between V3 and V5, it has generally already been determined how many kernel rows there will be. Because of this, providing those nutrients early on can also lead to increased yields. So as we talked about on the previous slide, starter fertilizers can advance your crop maturity, as this study also shows. Corn fertilized with 3 gallons per acre of in-furrow 10-30-40 had more leaf collars on average than the untreated control. It's important to note as well that this application rate is on the low end of the rates that we discussed on the previous slide. But just because you get that advanced crop maturity does not always mean you're going to see increased yield. Despite the fact that the previous slide showed advanced crop maturity when starter fertilizer was applied in all 3 sites, grain yield was only affected in 1 out of 3 sites. So these are the same 3 sites that we looked at on the previous screen. While yield was not affected in all the sites, they did find in the study that grain moisture was reduced by 0.5 to 1.7 percentage points, so you will still save costs on drying. Knowing your soils is important, and so it's important to have tests done to ensure you're using the right nutrients. Let's take a quick look at Liebig's barrel analogy, which states that your most efficient resource nutrient determines maximum yield. When we look at this picture, each stave represents a nutrient in this example. If one of the staves is too short, then it doesn't matter how tall the other staves are. You aren't going to be able to fill the barrel higher than the shortest stave. In terms of plant growth, whichever resource is most efficient will determine how much potential yield you can have. In other words, adding more phosphorus to phosphorus-rich soils is going to have very minimal, if any, impact on yield if you have a deficiency in something else, which is why soil tests are important tools for decision making. This is true for any resource that the plant requires, such as water, limiting diseases, and other things, which is why you won't always see a payoff from one particular management decision. To elaborate on that, you're going to get the greatest responses to starter fertilizers when those nutrients are deficient. In this study done out of Iowa State University, which was featured just a few days ago on No-Till Farmer, the largest net returns were found when phosphorus and potassium were very low, low, or optimum. Anything above that with high or very high levels of phosphorus or potassium saw only losses recorded at $3 corn and $8 soybean. As we saw in the previous slide, yield responses can occur when starter fertilizer is used in soybean. However, these are usually smaller in magnitude than in corn. This is because soybean are more sensitive to salt damage than corn, so lower rates of starter fertilizer has to be used. Soybean are also typically planted later in the spring when the soils are warmer, so nutrients are more available. In this nature study done across 20 grower and dealer trials, they found a 2.6 bushel per acre yield benefit from applying 1.5 to 2.5 gallons of Rhizolink 31013 in-furrow. When considering starter fertilizer for your operation, you should consider which fertilizer to use and what soil type you have. Fertilizers with a salt index of 20 or lower are considered safe for in-furrow use. The general rule of thumb typically is not to apply more than 10 pounds per acre of nitrogen and potassium. However, this is dependent on the fertilizer source. So-called low salt fertilizers typically contain potassium phosphate, which has a much lower salt index than potassium chloride. Different soil types also have the ability to buffer seed from fertilizer salts in differing rates. Lower rates of fertilizer should be used on sandier textured soils compared to loams. As always, we recommend that you consult your local agronomist on the appropriate fertilizer sources and rates to apply in your operation. Here we've listed some of the common fertilizers and their corresponding salt indices. Note that any of the fertilizers listed below 1034.0 have a higher salt index than 20, so these should not be used in furrow as they can burn your seed. Also remember that seed injury is more likely to occur on soybean than corn, and this can differ by soil type. So speak with your agronomist or extension specialist if you're not sure what you should be using. So we've gone over the benefits of fertilizers in no-till farming and how they can provide nutrients when your plants need them most, and also how they can optimize your yield potentials. But if fungal pathogens are a problem, then this can still limit your emergence and yields. Think back to that slide I talked about a few slides ago with the barrel analogy. If something else is limiting your plant growth, it doesn't matter how much you throw at it, they can only grow to the maximum yield as determined by their limiting factor. So for this next section, I will go over some of the problems encountered by no-till farmers in terms of early disease in field crops, as well as the plant health benefits that you can get when using certain fungicides. So we've talked about how leaving residues on fields can prolong the length of time that soils stay more wet and cold, and how this can impact the nutrient availability. But this environment also favors the growth of many seedling diseases, particularly root rots and seedling blights caused by Pythium and Rhizoctonia species. The longer that it takes for seedlings to emerge in these environments, the greater chance they have of infection. If a plant does become infected, roots can rot, and this can restrict the ability of a plant to take up water and nutrients, which can inhibit the germination and lead to damping off that you often see in the fields in wet springs. Seed treatments are recommended to protect the seed from rot, while in-furrow fungicides are recommended to protect the developing root and stalks from rot. Listed here are the more common fungal diseases seen in field crops. There are many species of Pythium, and they can survive on a variety of hosts, so crop rotation is not a feasible management strategy on its own. Pythiums are the first disease to arrive, as they prefer the coldest environments. Symptoms include brown, soggy roots, and a restriction of water and nutrients can make the hypocotyls look pinched. Rhizoctonia arrive between planting and shortly after emergence, and they prefer warmer soils than Pythium. Symptoms of Rhizoctonia include shrunken, reddish-brown lesions on the hypocotyls near the soil line. Both Pythium and Rhizoctonia can lead to damping off in the seedling stage, creating uneven plant stand, and in severe cases can lead to replanting your field. Both of these diseases can increase under no-till environments. as seen here with rhizoctonia. This study in Washington looked at the impacts of rhizoctonia populations when the grower was transitioning from conventional tillage to direct seeding. The solid bars represent the tilled plots, and the white bars represent the no-till plots. You can see that they generally found higher populations of rhizoctonia in the no-till fields. It did find instances, though, where these levels evened out between tillage practices after many years. I believe it was between 8 to 12 years, which may be related to a change in the microflora balancing this out. But so far, this has not been confirmed. So using fungicides in-furrow can offer disease control when many fungal pathogens are present. But using the group 11 strobilurins like Headline, Quadris, and Asteroid can also provide plant health benefits if they are applied at the appropriate times. In particular, use of azoxystrobin, which is the active ingredient found in both Asteroid and Quadris, can provide your plants with many extra benefits. These include preserving the green leaf area, which extends the time for grain fill, increasing water use efficiency, which can improve a plant's tolerance to drought, improving CO2 absorption, which enhances the photosynthesis and increases sugar production, as well as providing a benefit of broad-spectrum disease control. The strobilurin family of fungicides can prolong greening in a crop by inhibiting the ethylene production. Ethylene production leads to leaf senescence, which is characterized by a lack of chlorophyll in the plants. Strobilurins like azoxystrobin are ACC synthase inhibitors. That is, they interfere with the conversion of ACC into ethylene, so you're going to get a big decrease in their production. Looking at the graph here, the strobilurins decrease the amount of ethylene formed compared to the 2 auxins used, which are plant growth hormones that increase ethylene production. Delaying the senescence means extended time for more grain fill and higher yields for you. Strobilurins can also improve the water use efficiency of plants by reducing the amount of water lost through transpiration. In this study that was done on wheat, this effect was more pronounced under larger applications of water. The efficiency was less noticeable when water was limited, but there's more potential for water use efficiency in drier times. In addition to this, it's important to note as well that many hybrids are more susceptible than others to limited water. Strobilurins are a great fungicide to use to help them maximize their water use. There is also a movement towards more water-efficient hybrids, but they're not quite at the stage that they could be at yet. So those hybrids could also benefit from added improvements in water use efficiency. The strobilurins have also been shown to increase plant growth by increasing the levels of nitrate reductase in plants. Nitrate is the preferred uptake and transport form of nitrogen in most crop plants. Once nitrate reaches the plant, it is reduced to nitrite by nitrate reductase and subsequently to ammonium M. The ammonium M is transferred to carbon-containing compounds which then produce amino acids, the building blocks of proteins. So by increasing the amount of nitrate reductase, strobilurins make nitrates more readily available for the plants to use to produce those essential proteins and speed up plant growth. Looking at this study, you can see an example of this. Azoxystrobin in spring barley almost doubled the amount of proteins that were found by dry weight compared to the untreated barley. So using the strobilurins provide many different plant health benefits, and this can lead to differing things in each crop. For corn, you may see improved stalk strength, which will give improved hail and wind tolerance, and it can also lead to more uniform seed sizes. In soybeans, you have more uniform seed size and improved quality. In potatoes, you can have larger tubers and reduced sugar ends. In sugar beets, you can have improved frost tolerance and increased recoverable sugars. And in addition to these plant health benefits, you also get great disease control and more uniform emergence, which helps to optimize your seed yield potential. So now that we've gone over some of the challenges you may face with no-till farming in terms of early diseases and nutrient availability, we'll go over what the costs of some of those inputs can look like. The examples I'll be going over will be specific to corn, but prices for other field crops will be similar. The very first question you should ask yourself is, should I be using in-furrow products? When prices are high, this is a no-brainer. You're going to get a good return. But with low grain prices being the way they are, there are many things to consider. First, do you have a history of diseases in your field? Have you noticed uneven stand counts before? Have you had to replant fields from poor emergence at all in recent years? Secondly, what is the weather forecast looking like? Are you expecting a cold, wet spring that will favor disease growth and slow emergence? Thirdly, what hybrids are you using? Are they more susceptible to certain diseases? Will they need extra protection or benefit from a boost in plant health like improved drought tolerance? Soil health, what nutrients are you lacking? Do you need to add more? Higher organic matter may bind up nutrients longer than low organic matter, so how much nutrients do you need to make available at planting? Lastly, the most important question, do the economics make sense? These are all the questions you should be asking, and even if you think the answer is no to everything, you may be surprised at the benefits you can still get from using in-furrow products. The next few slides will go over some case studies which compare the cost of applications to possible yield benefits and returns you may see. Typically, when you're using fungicide in furrow, you'll see 5 to 10 bushels per acre on top of starter fertilizer alone. This chart lays out the return on your investment at different yield increases on the left and the price of corn listed at the top. You can obviously switch this out with other crops relatively easily. So here we see that if you decide you're applying in furrow that costs $12 per acre, you break even at any price of corn as long as you get an average boost of 4 bushels per acre, and you double your money or more at 8 bushels per acre or above. This means that most years applying a fungicide in furrow will have a positive return on investment. And of course, your ROI is even better once the commodity cycle turns around and corn prices increase, or if your fungicide is less than $12 per acre. I'm sure some of you on this call still don't use starter fertilizer, but have been thinking about making the switch. Well, most planters these days can be retrofitted with those starter fertilizer tanks. Previously, you would have to make the call based on the yield increase for a starter. Now though, if you can get an additional yield bump by putting down a fungicide in furrow, the economics can make even more sense. If your starter gets you 5 to 10 bushels per acre, and your fungicide gets you an additional 5 to 10 bushels per acre, in total, you can hit 10 to 20 bushels per acre. So let's assume you get 8 bushels an acre for your starter. At $3.25 corn, that's $26. Let's say you buy 1034-0 for $13. That means you're making an extra $13 per acre. For starter and fungicide use, you double your yield benefit. With $12 fungicide, that means you make 27 extra bucks per acre. Let's say retrofitting your planter will cost $7,500. At $13 extra profit per acre that we figured out on the previous slide, you need 600 acres of corn to pay for the liquid kit. If you're using fungicide as well, you only need 275 acres. That means by using a fungicide with your starter, you can be confident that you should be able to pay back that investment in your first year if you're getting average yield improvements. In corn, growers are often applying a foliar fungicide at tassel to control the foliar diseases like anthracnose, gray leaf spot, northern corn leaf blight, and bearing rusts. Using an in-furrow strobilurin fungicide can increase a plant's resistance to disease by boosting the overall plant health and reducing other stressors. It can also decrease the amount of soil diseases that can infect the leaf tissue or stalk of the plant. And particularly, using xylem-mobile fungicides like azoxystrobin can also provide some limited foliar protection against diseases if the pressure is low. This means that in years where disease pressure is expected to be low, growers may be able to skip a foliar application of the fungicide at tassel. It's important to note, however, that headline and mancozeb won't give you any foliar protection if applied in furrow, as they are not xylomobile. So before we go into what the cost may look like to skip a later tassel application, let's look at the possible yields that you can typically see from the different application timings. Looking at this graph, the V6 and VT applications give you the highest yield bump, followed by in-furrow plus V6 application. Third, we have the in-furrow treatment, which also has the highest yield bump out of the solo applications. Giving your plants the best start right from planting will enable them to better fight off pathogens later. You can then wait and determine if you will need to use the later V6 or VT application. Even though these yields look high for that V6 and VT, and it might tempt you to do that, doesn't mean it will always pay off. The application costs are much more expensive for V6 and VT, considering the in-furrow treatments are done at planting. So assuming you're already set up for liquid fertilizer applications, then there are no added equipment costs. Because of this, the in-furrow applications are cheapest, and we've estimated them at $12 per acre based on the product cost alone. The V6 applications include a later pass over your field at an application cost of roughly $6.50 for the application alone and $12 per acre on top of it for product costs. The VT applications are the most costly, with aerial applications typically costing around $25 per acre and product costs at about $12 per acre. This means that even though you may be seeing great yield boosts, you're not necessarily getting a good ROI on those expensive applications. The in-furrow application, on the other hand, can give you great ROI because it is the cheapest to apply. In addition to the in-furrow program being the most efficient for ROI, the fact that you can skip the aerial application can really make an impact, even if you can't skip it every year. Looking at this slide, I've suggested two programs. Program 1 is an in-furrow fungicide, and then coming back over the top with an aerial application when the disease pressure is high in your area, but skipping that aerial application when disease pressure is low. For this example, I've just assumed that you have to do an aerial application every other year. If you compare that to always having to do the aerial application, you save quite a bit of money. Using the in-furrow fungicides can save you money. They increase your profits by increasing your yield by more than the cost of the fungicide. They decrease the payback period on liquid fertilizer equipment, so you get that out quickly. And it decreases the frequency of expensive aerial applications at VT, so you can wait and see if you need it or not. So now that we've gone over how those products can be used, we'll take a look at some of the products that are available for in-furrow use. Fungicides that are labeled for at-plant use typically do not mix well with liquid fertilizers without the use of specialized equipment. Because of the high salt environments of starter fertilizers, most fungicides end up chunking and turning into cottage cheese when mixing them with fertilizers. I'm sure most of you have seen this before. I've heard many stories of growers trying to mix these things together, only to have them dump out their entire tank because the clumping was so severe. There are a few strobilurin products that will mix with liquid fertilizers if you want to use both at plant, and these all have varying degrees of mixing success. So Asteroid is a product that we've released this year in demo plots, and it uses azoxystrobin, the same active ingredient that's found in Quadris. Unlike Quadris, it mixes excellently with any liquid fertilizer that we've tried it with. Tipera, a new fluoxystrobin product from Arista that they're saying will be released in 2017, also has the same great mixing capabilities. These two products are xylomobile, which means that unlike Headline, they will confer some of those plant health benefits that I mentioned earlier to your crops when applied in furrow. Asteroid also has a longer residual period than Tipera, which means it has activity against soil-borne pathogens for a longer period. Both Asteroid and Tipera have activity against pythiums in most crop species, but neither product is active against the main pythium species found in corn. So if you're applying either product for control of rhizotonia, then you will see some activity against other pythium species. So I'm going to walk you through some of the product benefits and yield data we've seen with Asteroid so far. This product mixes flawlessly with starter fertilizers with no dilutions needed. It is labeled for all in-furrow and foliar uses of azoxystrobin, and the use rate allows 1 gallon to treat up to 15 acres for in-furrow use. So far, I've talked a lot about corn and soybean in this webinar, but Asteroid has a full label with many other crops and diseases on it, including potatoes, sugar beets, peanuts, and cotton. You can find the full label on our website as well as on the CDMS website. Between field and lab testing, we've tested Asteroid with over 30 different fertilizers, and we haven't had any issues reported. Some do require more agitation than others, but looking at this picture, you can see the challenges that other competitors face. The left product is one that claims to be fertilizer compatible, while the middle product uses the same active ingredient as Asteroid, but is not fertilizer compatible. You can see that Asteroid on the right mixes very well compared to the other two. Field trials done across Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, and Louisiana in 2014 and 2015 saw an 8.8 bushel per acre increase when the Asteroid was used with starter fertilizer over the use of just starter fertilizer alone. So don't forget, on top of that, you can still get an extra 5 bushels per acre to 10 with the use of starter fertilizer. We've had Asteroid out on farms in 6 states on corn and beans this past summer. This is one example of a harvest result this year, and with an average increase of 10 bushels per acre in Iowa, he's pretty happy with his harvest. His second hybrid is a great example of how using these in-furrow products are not guaranteed to increase your yields. If something else is limiting growth, then you can only improve the yield so much. But with yields like plus 13 and the plus 17 that he saw here, he's more than made back his money. The site with 17 bushels per acre is a great return on investment. We will be releasing a full summary of our harvest results in the next 4 to 6 weeks, and anyone who's interested in receiving a copy of those results should go to our Asteroid webpage and sign up for our mailing list. This is one of the pictures we got back from the field this year, taken in Marshall, Minnesota. On the left, you can see what the root systems look like when using Asteroid in combination with starter fertilizer. The plant on the right was treated with only starter fertilizer. The fungicide treated plant has a much larger root mass that you can see, and this is going to help that plant reach maturity much faster and optimize the potential for yield gains. Soybean trials done in Illinois, Iowa, and Indiana also saw yield boosts when Asteroid was applied in addition to starter fertilizer by an extra 2.6 bushels per acre. Asteroid had great crop safety on soybean, but again, make sure you speak with your agronomist when deciding what starter fertilizers to use for your area, as soybeans are more sensitive to high salts. This is another picture that we got back from one of our grower demo trials this summer. The soybean on the left was treated with both Asteroid and starter fertilizer, while the soybean on the right was treated with only starter fertilizer. You can see that the root growth on the plant lacking fungicides was fairly restricted, while the root mass on the fungicide-treated seedling is much greater. Use of Asteroid also increased nodulation on the soybean. I often get asked, well, how is Asteroid going to affect the good microbes in my soil? Azoxystrobin has been shown to have little impact on the beneficial microbes, particularly the mycorrhizal fungi that create the nodules. It may even have activity against some of the fungal species that interfere with nodulation, as we can see in this picture. Overall, this means a much healthier soybean plant for this grower in Ainsworth, Iowa. Using Asteroid lets you have a worry-free tank mix with your starter fertilizers, so you can get both done in one easy, convenient pass. We've tested it in varying conditions, and it performs excellently after being frozen and then thawed. So especially for growers getting out early to plant, you don't need to worry if you have leftovers in your tank at the end of the day if you don't finish. We also had one grower who got rained out this year for 4 days after he mixed it in his tank with his fertilizer. Once he got back out into the field, the product mixed right back up with no issues. Go out and buy special equipment in order to mix fertilizer with your fungicide. If you're set up for liquid fertilizers already, then that's all you need. Using the fungicide will protect your crops against seedling diseases past what a seed treatment can offer. And combined with the additional plant health benefits you may see, this gets your crops off to the best start possible, maximizing those yield potentials. So just to summarize, no-till growers face a unique set of challenges with typically having colder and wetter soils for longer. Those cold, wet soils can really slow the emergence of the plants by limiting the nutrient availability and also increase the chance for disease growth, so especially those water-loving diseases like pythiums and rhizoctonias. Using a starter fertilizer and fungicide like Astroid can optimize your field's yield potential and act as insurance. So using that in-furrow fungicide will just give you extra plant health benefits that can later fight later diseases and just act as extra insurance on top of your seed treatment. So with that, thank you all for listening today. I can take any extra questions, and if I don't get to them today, or if you think of more later, you can reach me at the email address above, or visit us on our website at www.bycrop.com.
All right. Well, Kelly, we do have a couple of questions, so we'll get started. First question I've got here is, how quickly do polyphosphate pop-up fertilizers become available to the plant?
Okay. Typically, the polyphosphate pop-ups take about 7 to 14 days, but this will vary with the soil moisture and temperature. The conversion, as I talked about, is going to be slower under cool and dry conditions. But if you are using the polyphosphate pop-ups, they do coincide with the timing with crop emergence. So they are available when the plant starts to emerge and needs it.
All right, great. Thank you. Second question we've got here is, what do you use as a time trigger when to apply fungicide for the best control?
Okay. Well, the in-furrow fungicides take the guesswork out of timing those early season diseases. So if you put it down during planting and you're done for a while, you don't need to worry about those early season diseases. Thinking about later foliar diseases, as I mentioned, it's important to take into account things like history of the disease in your field, these reports from your local extension services, and the weather that you're likely to see over the summer. So for example, if it's going to be a wet summer, you're more likely to have those higher disease pressures, and you'll want to use the foliar fungicides then.
All right, great. Can you talk a little bit about fertilizing soybeans in furrow? This person was wondering whether it pays and how you prevent seed burn to the soybean plants.
Sure. So I did talk a little bit about that earlier. With soybeans, you want to use a low rate of a low salt fertilizer. Typically, that's around 1 to 3 gallons per acre. And don't forget, if you get a soil analysis done, you want to use something high in whatever your limiting resource is. So the yields are going to be most closely associated with a low soil test P. So if you have that, then it's most likely to pay if you're throwing more phosphorus on it. I did talk earlier about one study that was done on soybeans. They saw an advantage when using 3-10-13, and that really helped to provide a good boost of phosphorus early when their availability was limited by the cold.
All right, next question we have here is, what additional yield benefit is to be expected over current new fungicide treatments, and what's the compatibility with liquid fertilizer?
Sure. So for the in-furrow treatments, Astroid is the leading choice in terms of benefits. So it's xylem mobile, unlike Headline, so it can be taken up by the plant. And in addition to having the disease control, you also get those extra plant health benefits, which I talked about. It also has the best-in-class mixing capabilities with liquid fertilizer. So if you want to be applying that fertilizer, Astroid is a great product to use. A lot of the retailers are still suggesting using something like a dosatron for mixing Headline with fertilizer, With Asteroid, you don't need to go out and use that. Xanthion is likely to be replacing headline for in-furrow use from BASF. This will mix with the fertilizer, but it does need to be used with a dosatron. And it uses a biological as well as a synthetic fungicide that's found in headline. But it also needs an inductor to use with your tank. And some growers are still skeptical about how well that will work. So we're going to have to wait and see how well that one works in comparison to Asteroid.
All right, great. This question is, would phosphorus applied directly to the seed as a coating be more effective than a furrow application?
I haven't seen any direct comparative studies. They should both be effective at delivering small amounts of phosphorus to the crop. Both sources would be in close proximity to the seed. The risk with doing it on the coating and having it so close is that you risk burning the seed, whereas applying that starter in furrow gives you the flexibility to not have to coat seeds and gives you a little bit of peace of mind, lower risk. So if you are thinking of doing a coating like that, I would suggest trying it out on only a small area of your field first to test for safety.
All right, great. This next question is about fungicide options for corn on corn. Can you talk about some of the options that are out there?
Sure. So that's going to vary depending on what disease is most prevalent. So for pythiums, as I mentioned, both headline and Asteroid are not effective against the most common strain of pythium in corn. So for something like that, Noxam or Captain, but those cannot mix with starter fertilizers. If Rhizoctonia is the most prevalent, you're going to want to use a strobilurin like Asteroid, and you may still get some control of the other pythiums, just not the main pythium. Both pythium and Rhizoctonia will be problematic in corn on corn as well, so you'll have to keep an eye on both of those. If you are using a seed treatment as well and it only has one fungicide, I'd recommend picking an in-furrow fungicide from a different frac group, and this will help give you better control and less of a chance of resistance buildup in your field. So just be aware of what's on your seed and what you're going to be using in-furrow as well.
Okay, great. This person is wondering about the protection of in-furrow fungicides, what they offer in terms of length. Is it just a short-term protection to the seedling, or can they expect longer-term plant protection throughout the whole season, or both?
Well, the in-furrow fungicide applications typically aren't meant to replace the foliar applications, but in years with low disease pressure, like I talked about earlier, the xylomobile fungicides like Asteroid used at plant can provide enough benefits to your plants that they'll have a better chance of withstanding those later foliar diseases. But again, that's only used best in low disease pressures. You still will want to scout your fields and look at the weather that's expected. And if you are likely to have high foliar disease pressure or a history of disease in your field, then you'll still want to make that later foliar application. So again, I don't recommend it 100% of the time as a replacement option.
All right, great. This question is about how in-furrow fungicides impact beneficial VAM fungi. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, you want to make sure that you keep a balance of your in-furrow fungicide. You want to make sure you don't over-apply, because over-applying can really impact what your different microbial levels are. So the soil microbes can be killed directly at the site of the application of those fungicides, but with those added nutrients and the increased soil organic matter, it can promote quick recolonization of those microbes, and you can end up seeing enhanced microbial activity. When you're controlling those as well, you can get some control out of competitive organisms that outcompete the beneficial VAMs. So it can help if you have a nice balance of what you're using.
Okay, great. Another one we have here, this person is wondering about the trials conducted with Asteroid. Have you done any university trials with that product, or have they all been on farm so far?
Oh, sure. We have done sugar beet trials and vegetable trials at universities. So we are waiting on results of those, and they will be published in the next few months as well. We're hoping in 3 to 4 weeks. But again, if you sign up for our mailing list, we'll get that out to you, or you can check our website in about a month. And all of our field crop trials were conducted by third-party research organizations, but not university. This past year was our first year getting them out into on-farm, large-scale demo plots.
Okay, great. And speaking of trials, this person is also wondering whether you've done any yield trials with asteroid in-furrow on sugar beets.
Yeah, so we're actually looking at that right now. We've got trials currently being conducted at NDSU with Mohammed Khan to evaluate the efficacy and crop safety of applying the starter fertilizer and the asteroid in-furrow. Again, those results will be in shortly, so you can sign up for our mailing list or check back on our website in about a month's time, and we'll have those results for you.
All right, great. This person is wondering about the stay green problem that you'll see with foliar fungicides. Are you going to see that same type of problem with in-furrow fungicides?
Yes, so in-furrow fungicides can enhance the stay green because of those plant health benefits that we discussed earlier. So you are likely to see some heavier moisture later on just with the green. Senescence is delayed. So that does mean you need to make sure you're using the same tools to address that. So things like if you want to harvest at 110 days in potatoes, you'll want to plant a 100-day hybrid if you're going to use a strobilurin and fungicide because you are likely to see some stay green. But again, this is going to be more grain fill for you.
Okay, great. This question is again going back to studies. Have you done any studies on dry being response with in-furrow fungicides or fertilizers?
We have actually not done any of those yet. We're hoping to get some growers interested in it, and if they are, we'd love them to share their results with us.
Okay, great. Another question what we have here is about chopping corn silage or snaplage. How do fungicides control and or reduce the prevalence of vomitoxins and other issues that you kind of see with that in the end product?
Typically, the solo fungicides are not ideal to control the fusarium diseases that impact vomitoxin. So I wouldn't recommend that in-furrow application. In some cases, it's even been reported to make it worse. So I would not recommend that use.
Okay, great. Well, that pretty much wraps up the questions we have. So thank you, Kelly, so much for taking the time to answer those questions. Before we conclude, just a heads up that when you log off today, you will receive a questionnaire to complete. It's simple, easy to complete with a small number of questions. Your answers will help us determine the value of today's webinar and plan for future webinars. Second, we will be making available via email to you a replay of today's webinar in the event you'd like to go back and review the entire presentation or parts of the presentation. You'll also find that replay of the webinar up on our No-Till Farmer website shortly. There is an archive section on the website where you can go back and listen to other recently completed webinars. Finally, any questions we didn't get to this morning, we are going to share back with Kelly to answer. We will post those with the webinar replay as soon as they are available. Thanks again to Kelly for leading today's presentation and Vive Crop Protection for sponsoring this webinar. Also thanks to Joe Kunzel, who is our producer for today's webinar. Thanks again for joining us, and we hope you have a successful harvest.